If a small flock of cartoon bluebirds didn't help you get dressed this morning, that just means you haven't yet listened to Fine Tuning with Jim Hill and Drew Taylor. No, the black dress slacks, please. Thank you. And now, Jim Hill.
Welcome to Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor, your one-stop shop when it comes to animation news and commentary. I'm Jim Hill, and before Drew and I get started here, we're running behind schedule here. We should have had a show out quite a while ago. I had to travel. I was out in Ohio for Dayton, Disneyana. While I was traveling, all of this animation news broke. So let's bring Drew in now.
Okay, I'm here.
So while I'm out in Ohio, the Walt Disney Company deliberately released this news after the financial markets had closed on Friday afternoon. And this is typically what you do when you have bad news that you don't necessarily want to be in the spotlight. And the news was that John Lasseter will not be returning to Pixar Animation Studios, or Disney for that matter, that he's settling into a new consulting position. Do I have that right?
Yeah, but he will not have an office at either animation studio anymore, which is very surprising given that when they redesigned the animation studio in Burbank, you walk up those stairs. You've been to it since they've redesigned it.
No,
right?
In fact,
Oh, okay.
The last time I was there, our friend Amy Astley, they were in the process of moving her office because she was right next to the chute where all of the debris, when they were clearing out the third and fourth floor of the building, that all of it would go by her office. So it's like, I need to go someplace else.
Yeah, so when you walk up the stairs, you can now sort of walk up the famous Emperor Mickey hat. Mm-hmm. And when you get up the top of the stairs, there's a giant office with all these toys. And that was Lasseter's office. So it'll be interesting to see. And it was the highlight of every tour. So it'll be interesting to see how they deal with that now.
Supposedly, the plan is to pick a long weekend when there's basically nobody in the building. I guess they were going to try to do it over the July 4th weekend, but it turns July 4th is literally in the middle of the week. So I guess they've kicked the can to the long Labor Day weekend, but it's a coordinated effort that things will basically stay in place till that point. And then over a long weekend when no one's in the building, they're going to send movers in, clear all this stuff off, and then it all gets shipped off to the Lasseter family of vineyards. The winery.
Okay. Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah. So you and I were talking about this off air, and John steps away in November 2017. There's sort of an arbitrary 6-month sabbatical. But last month, around the 22nd, there was a piece in the Wall Street Journal that you found particularly interesting.
Yeah, it was a piece that floated the idea that he would come back to oversee things at Disney Animation, Pixar. People don't talk about Toon Studio, but he was also overseeing that. And he also has a very large role in Walt Disney Imagineering, which explains why we're getting Pixar Pier and Pixar Fest and all of this stuff this summer. Yeah. But from the people that have talked to me about it, that was a piece that actually Disney kind of inserted a balloon test, as Jim likes to say, to get people's reaction to that. And as both Jim and I know, the reaction was not very good to that idea.
One of the concepts of this article was that John would return in a reduced role, that as part of the language there, they were discussing Pete Docter taking on more of a leading role at Pixar, likewise Jennifer Lee at Disney feature animation, but there just wasn't a good reaction to that. And they had to know that, given what supposedly came out at the day of listening that was done at the studio back in February. If the Walt Disney Company lets Roseanne Barr go, she did her racist tweet, and it was within 12 hours she was gone. They shut down that show and that sort of thing. There really was just no way with that reaction that they were ever going to allow Lasseter back into the building. To do so would have sent completely the wrong message and just would have exposed a double standard that Roseanne said racist things where John inappropriate touching or hugging or however you want to go.
Right.
This was real. I still just feel terrible about this. We really owe so much to the team he assembled. The work that they did to change CG from this thing that created chrome balls that would, 30 seconds long of flying through the air, to now we have these amazing feature films like Incredibles 2, which the first estimates of the opening weekend came through, and I guess Disney has to confirm this, but they're saying 181 million for the opening weekend, which you just pointed out was...
It's like 3/4 of the domestic gross of the first movie in total. I mean, this thing is a juggernaut, and I think it's easily going to clear the $1 billion worldwide mark. Wouldn't you say that's true?
Well, I mean, if you make the comparison to the opening weekend, in fact, here we have a CG superhero movie. Right now, it sits between the 7th and the 8th highest opening weekend for the domestic market. And the two films it sits between are Avengers Age of Ultron, which opened with 191 million, and Captain America Civil War at 179 million. So it's playing like a legitimate superhero movie,
right?
Which for me really bodes well for Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse come December this year.
That's true. I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
But let's not overlook the other thing that it's kind of breaking over this weekend, and that's the whole issue with the strobe thing. Suddenly, Disney PR finds itself dealing with this viral online thing. I want to say that there's a Jennifer Lewis who posted something, I think, on Instagram talking about the strobe effect that's used for the Screen Slayer villain and how it's used multiple times during the film. And this thing gained traction yesterday, and now evidently theaters all over the country, as you come to pick up your tickets, there were signs in the box office, stressing that there is this strobe effect used several times over the course of the movie. And for those who are prone to seizures or got epilepsy or that sort of thing, they need a heads up about this. And
is Veronica Lewis anyone like of prominence, or did her tweet just kind of catch on because she really goes into detail about how long these strobes are, and it blew up? I mean, there's an article on Deadline right now about just citing her tweets as reason for the studio to put a warning on.
Yeah, to my knowledge, she's just a civilian who got this out there. And I have to say, when I was watching the movie and this scene happened, it was like, wow, that's kind of a bold choice given the whole... How many times do you go to a Disney theme park and it's just sort of like, the show uses, the warning signs, the show uses strobes and fog and that sort of thing. If you're sensitive to these issues, please be aware. And so it's like, this had to come up as a discussion.
Well, what's interesting is that the same day that I saw Incredibles 2 a couple of weeks ago, I saw Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom that morning, and there are similar strobes in the last sort of third of the movie, and somebody actually had an epileptic seizure, and so I never saw the last 10 minutes of the movie because the screening was shut down. I mean, it was crazy. So it is a very real concern, I feel. And so, I mean, I am glad that there's going to be some kind of warning, because I was also very taken by that scene. But it's also, I think, a really cool scene. I mean, you've never really seen anything like that in modern animation where it strobes like that. And I don't know. I thought it was a very cool scene. But yeah, this is a very real thing.
No, I agree. Totally cool scene. But at the same time, it's being on a roller coaster and it's like, wow, that beam is really low and will take the heads off of tall people. But hey, it's still cool. Moving on to, we should talk about the other aspect of the Lasseter story. And it's as John is transitioning. And again, the way it was explained is that John will no longer have an office. Based on what my friend was saying, it's like John's not allowed to come back. They don't want him on the Burbank lot. They don't want him on the Pixar campus, which is unfortunate, but he will still consult from home. This will continue through the end of this year, and then he looks forward to new creative challenges. The big question is, how do you replace a John Lasseter? And Kim Masters, who's the Hollywood Reporter, just yesterday filed a story about how Disney's putting together, or Disney and Pixar are putting together what they're calling creative approval teams.
So not the brain trust, but something different.
Yeah, so this is what Kim's been able to find out so far, that I guess there's going to be a total of 7 people at Pixar. One of the women that's been appointed to the team is Domi Shi. She did the bow short that's in front of Incredibles 2. And then, let's see, we have a Lindsay Collins and a Corey Ray. Corey was the producer of Monsters University, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then the male side of the team is Pete Docter, Lee Unkrich, and Dan Scanlon. And in fact, you have that great piece of info about Dan's new movie for Pixar.
Right. So at D23, they previewed this, what they called the Untitled Suburban Fantasy World film. And I guess there were some copyright approvals put in Europe that somebody got a hold of. And it looks like the movie is called Onward, which is a very cool, very Pixar movie title, but they're guessing that Onward is the untitled suburban fantasy movie that they previewed at D23 that I think you and I both thought was really special looking.
I totally agree, and I have to say I love the title. Really looking forward to this project. I guess we should also talk quickly about the Disney side of the fence. That evidently is still a work in progress. What is been reported multiple times now is that Jennifer Lee, the co-director of Frozen, she's going to be assuming a new management type role at Feature Walt Disney Animation Studios. Also, a name that keeps bubbling up is Rich Moore, the director of Wreck-It Ralph, Zootopia, and Ralph Breaks the Internet. So given the size of the Pixar team, we're going to see a few more names here.
Yeah, Bird's name is not in there, which is interesting because you would think that maybe he would want to jump at the chance of doing something more kind of big picture, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he sticks around Pixar or what his next move is. But you were saying what's interesting about Corey Ray is that her wife is Darla Anderson, who just left Pixar after winning an Oscar for Coco.
Yeah, I mean, literally the week that Coco took the Oscar for Best Feature Animation, she made her exit from Disney and Pixar. This was clearly coordinated because I'm sure you were struck as much as I was that I think it's the same thing. It was news that was broken on a Friday, but it was accompanied by kind words by Ed Catmull, kind words by Bob Iger. And these are, you don't get spontaneous statements from folks like this. When you're coordinating a Friday afternoon exit, that's weeks in the planning. So that was fascinating to see her leave. And the rumors that's been making the round in the industry is that she's either going to Hulu or Netflix and setting up an animation studio there, and who may be joining her after he wraps things up at Disney and Pixar is John Lasseter. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. And
yeah,
that's an interesting space to be doing animation in. And speaking of interesting places or interesting things that are going in animation, Warner Brothers Animation announced that a new short-form cartoonist-driven Looney Tunes content program. And the way they explain this, it's going to a variety of screens in 2019. So what do you make of that?
So they're committing what, like 1,500 minutes of original content every year spread across platforms? Is that the number?
Yeah, well, actually, what I've got here, at least for year one, is 1,000 minutes.
Okay.
Which, by the way, if we're going to do the whole rent 525,600 minutes thing, this is 16 hours and 37.4 minutes of animation. But they're saying it's across multiple platforms, including digital, mobile, and broadcast.
I just want to know who I want to know who the creatives are behind it, because they say they're going out to original animators and they're going to put their spin on the classic characters. And I just wonder, is there any kind of cohesion to this? Is it because they cite Tex Avery and Chuck Jones and all these people in the press release, but yeah, I mean, you were looking at how many times they've rebooted Looney Tunes in the last 15 years, right? And it's a staggering amount.
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, if you think about the Lunatics Unleashed thing from 2005, and which was followed in May of 2011 by the Looney Tunes show, which, as they were launching, that explains it's sort of Seinfeld meets The Odd Couple. And of course, before that, we had things like Space Jam. There were 2 or 3 different sequels for that proposed. One was Spy Jam with Jackie Chan, and another one was, if you can believe it, Race Jam with Jeff Gordon.
Oh, wow.
But from there, we got Looney Tunes Back in Action with Eric Goldberg handling the animation there. So I'd love to see Eric back in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, we're buddies with Eric, but the only time he's ever been defensive is when I said something. I knocked Looney Tunes Back in Action, and he said, the animation of those characters was perfect. So, I agree. His animation was brilliant. So, yeah, seeing him just do Looney Tunes animation would be great. Is there anybody else you would like to see kind of handle this?
I have to tell you, was just sort of calling around, and people flat out admitted that one of the things that's driving the bus here is Paul Ruddish and what he's managed to do with Mickey. The Mickey shorts at this point, I want to say there's 84 of them, plus the 2 holiday specials, and in March of this year they just got picked up for a 5th season, plus of course the Mickey and Minnie Runaway Railway attraction for Hollywood Studios that'll be coming online next May. And they tried something similar with Wabbit. I guess that was the giveaway that something was about to happen, because in January of this year, a word came down that that show, which started back in September of 2015, wasn't getting picked up for a 4th season. So I guess we should have noticed that, and two, that once again the Looney Tunes are about to get rebooted. But I was flat out told it's like Warner Brothers is looking what Disney did with Mickey and the Fab Five and all that with these shorts, and wants in. They are willing to bring a lot of artists in to get their individual takes on the characters, and it's kind of going to be like a bake-off, that you'll have all these different takes on the characters, and if there's a really particularly strong response to one artist's take on the characters and that sort of thing, that concept may go to series. But I was also warned, it's like, look, it's a completely different age now. For example, if you look at the Mickey shorts, they're all deliberately kept to 3 minutes. Every so often you'll get a 6-minute long one or the holiday special, but they're designed to be punchy and fun and play just as well on your television as they do on your iPhone. And that really is where a lot of people believe the future of at least this type of animation is. So really love that they're going to try to do this. Want it to succeed, but I guess the proof is in the pudding, and it's just going to be interesting to see. Just like you, I'd love to hear some names as to who they've invited to the table and who's going to get to pull a Tashlin or a Tex Avery and put their stamp on these classic characters.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I wonder too if they'll dip into the kind of Adult Swim stockpile of creators there too, because they're all owned by the same company now.
That would be cool. That would be cool.
Yeah.
It brings a whole different sensibility to the table. Now, speaking of reinventing classic characters, just in the past week, we finally saw the trailer for Illumination Entertainment's The Grinch drop. And so what did you think of that?
I wasn't super crazy about it. I don't know how many Grinch movies we need, but I'm not totally crazy about Illumination's look. But I understand why they look the way that they do, because these are movies that are deliberately kept at a very reasonable price point, and the profits for all of them are huge, astronomical, no matter, how much they make. And then they always surprise people by making so much money. I think, didn't Sing end up outgrossing Moana domestically? I mean, that's insane.
That's kind of nuts. I actually reached out to a friend at Universal Pictures in the PR department, and he was telling me, he was almost kind of apologizing for the ad. And this is the teaser trailer that's going to be running during the summer out in front of Jurassic Park Fallen World, and an ad that's filled with Christmas imagery is just not going to play well in July and August.
Right.
That's one of the reasons why they chose the stuff that they chose for this ad. I mean, if you watch the Christmas content, I guess he was saying out of the 2-minute long ad, there's 5 seconds of Christmas stuff. The rest of it is fairly generic, and said as we get closer to the actual release date in November, we'll see more of the more traditional Grinch stuff, come into this and hopefully do a better job. He was making the comparison to sort of, do you remember the original Frozen trailers where it was Olaf and Sven, Olaf on the ice, and they were fighting over his nose, the carrot?
Yes.
Said, we didn't want to do that. In fact, I guess there was some discussion of doing a animation with Max and the Grinch for summer, but it's just sort of like, let's go with stuff from the actual film.
Including a moose that likes to eat cream cheese or whatever that was at the end of the trailer.
I don't know what to tell you, but on the other hand, what did you think of the trailer that also came out in this past week or so for How to Train Your Dragon Hidden World?
I'm just very interested in seeing how that story is going to play out, because I think we're both big fans of that franchise, and I hope that they kind of stick the landing. I was a little disappointed with the second movie, considering how they built up Cate Blanchett's character to be this big thing, and then she's not even in the last half of the movie. So I'm really curious to see how this is going to play out. I mean, it looks beautiful, and did we like the new Night Fury, or the Light Fury, as they were calling it?
Well, from the folks who work at Universal PR, it was like, this is the teaser ad for a movie that won't be out till March of next year. So it's,
Right.
you know, it's just sort of like they went through everything that was there, and the stuff that tested well with people for ads was both Toothless and Hiccup being goofy and the mating dance, and that's really what they cut together. Dean Dubois was over at Annexy this past week and did this whole presentation about How to Train Your Dragon Hidden World, and showed 5 sequences from the movie and got this standing O at the end. But again, you know you're playing to a different crowd when you get a big hand. I guess they showed off Hiccup's new Night Fury Black Dragon armor that's evidently made out of scales that he's pulled off of Toothless, and it's just sort of like, I don't see a normal audience like, oh my God, look at the armor, honey. Oh, I'm so glad we came to the movies. But again, I'm just like you. I really loved the first film. I wasn't quite as in love with film 2, but I'm very hopeful in, you know, sort of a Cars 3 kind of a way, that it'll come in stronger and be a better cap for the whole thing, and we'll go from there. And
it'll be interesting to see too if they put those characters in the new DreamWorks theater, which we were talking about last week, or however long ago we recorded the last episode. But you know, there's that new state-of-the-art theater at Universal Hollywood, and I wonder if they're going to put them in there. And also, I was going to ask you, not to step on the toes of your many other podcasts, but is Grinchmas this year going to be to this Grinch and not the live-action Grinch?
Universal Entertainment has been walking up to this version of the Grinch, which, if you look at the actual Grinch show that they do for the parks, it's this weird camel thing that uses a lot of the dialogue and the shapes and the substance of the 1966 Chuck Jones half-hour-long version of the Grinch, the animated one. But the Grinch himself really is very heavily influenced by Jim Carrey's take on the Grinch, which that was November 2000. So to now have Benedict Cumberbatch, when they brought him on board, they actually pushed the initial release date for this thing was last year, holiday 2017. And when he came in, it's like, this really changes the film. So they pushed it to holiday 2018, and that meant that a lot of Universal's carefully planned promotional things, like the Grinch balloon debuting in last year's Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade as opposed to this year's.
Oh, did it debut last year?
Yes, it did.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But you were saying that the Geisel estate will only allow animated versions of the stories now, right? That
actually came down on the heels of the Mike Myers Cat in the Hat. I mean, I guess the Grinch thing rubbed Audrey Geisel, Dr. Seuss's widow, the wrong way, but the Mike Myers one, particularly in November 2003, was kind of the one that broke the Sneetch's back. It's like, oh, we're not doing this anymore. No more live action. You can do animated. So that's how we got Lorax in March of 2012, and that's how we got Horton in March of 2008. So just to be clear, Drew, in addition to redoing the show at the parks, and I guess what Universal Entertainment is going to do is that the problem is that the movie's, it's opening in theaters November 9th. The problem is that Grinchmas and a lot of the holiday programming only opens 2 weeks later, and there's just not enough time to gauge, will the public embrace this version of the Grinch, and should we now then be changing over to a more Benedict Cumberbatch influence take on the character? Evidently, the plan is to kick that decision down the road for 2019, and they're going to look at digital downloads, Blu-ray, DVD sales, and of course the film's box office. And if it's a significant enough hit, yeah, you will see that show retooled, and they'll talk it up about, we've now incorporated chunks and pieces of of the Illuminations entertainment version. But one of the other things, there has been a Mount Crumpet coaster that Universal has been trying to get out of development and into actual physical construction for years now. And the hope is at Universal, especially in the parks and resort side, that if this Illumination entertainment film is a big enough hit going into holiday 2018, that this project will finally make it off the drawing board, and we'll at least see it in Florida and perhaps someday out in Hollywood. So,
wow.
Anyway, we were talking about Incredibles 2 at the top of the show, and I'd really love to get into more of a discussion about that Pixar release and what you think of it. But let's pause here, do a quick ad, and then we'll pick up in a minute or two, okay?
Sounds great.
Once upon a mundane morning, Barb's day got busy without warning. A realtor in need of an open house sign. No, 50 of them, and designed before 9.
My head hurts.
Any mighty tools to help with his plight? Aha! Barb made her move. She opened Canva and got in the groove.
Bulk creating Canva sheets. Create 50 signs fit for suburban streets.
Done in a click, all complete.
Sweet!
Now, imagine what your dreams can become when you put imagination to work at canva.com.
¿Hablas español?
Sprichst du Deutsch?
Kann du Norsk?
If you used Babbel, you would. Babbel's conversation-based techniques teaches you useful words and phrases to get you speaking quickly about the things you actually talk about in the real world, with lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts and voiced by real native speakers. Babbel is like having a private tutor in your pocket. Start speaking with Babbel today. Get up to 55% off your Babbel subscription right now at babbel.com/Spotify, spelled BABBEL.com/Spotify. Rules and restrictions may apply.
And we're back. Now, you got to do the cool thing. You did the long lead for...
I did the long lead for this, and then I came back and did the junket and did TV interviews, so we could post some of that stuff in the show notes.
Okay.
You'll particularly enjoy when Catherine Keener started to realize that she could potentially get free admission to Disneyland and started freaking out. It's very funny.
Okay.
But yeah, so I've been on this whole press tour, it feels like, for the last few months, and so it was good to finally see the whole movie.
And obviously, again, as we were talking about the box office at the very top of the show, it's done very well out of the gate. It'll be interesting to see what the box office is like next weekend, because of course that's Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, which I guess at this point is threatening to blot out the sun box office wise. So be interesting to see what the fall off in tickets are. But all right, so worthy sequel to Incredibles? So what you...
I think so. I think I liked it more than you did. I thought it was worth the 14-year wait. Mm-hmm. I loved the way it was designed. I think we can both appreciate like how it looked, how the characters looked. I thought that it was just an amazing kind of accomplishment from Bird, a great comeback from Tomorrowland, which I enjoyed but was not very widely appreciated. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought it was just a blast. What were your thoughts, Jim? And be honest with us.
Pixar is the home of the truly great sequel. I mean, one would argue that Toy Story 3 for me, in fact, I went to the Toy Story 3 kind of pissed off because I so enjoyed Toy Story 2 and Toy Story 1. I felt like, oh God, they're going back to the well and they're going to screw this up. And the fact that it was that strong and played so beautifully. In fact, there's a part of me right now who has been hearing all of the issues with Toy Story 4 and how they've junked so much of the script and have started over. And it's like, oh, don't screw this up.
Yeah.
So the thing with Incredibles is it took so long, again, 14 years to get here. And in a weird sort of way to pick up right where the first film left off with the Underminer. And I mean, again, I don't want to quibble, but were you surprised that given what a classic constructionist Brad Bird is, that we didn't circle back on the Underminer?
Yeah, that was interesting that he never played any kind of role. And I guess he let slip during one of my interviews with him that the original conceit of the movie and the reason that I got greenlit at Pixar had to do with this villain plot that was not used at all. John Walker let it slip that it involved AI and buildings that came to life and all of this craziness that was not in the movie. So I wonder if in that version or any of the other versions that they were working on, that the Underminer actually came back and played a role. I think what's interesting is that he said on one of these press days that there's like a cold open to the movie, and that animation and a couple of scenes before directly mirror the first movie, so that you can go from watching the first movie to the second one and have no change in animation style and models or anything until after the title card. And then it goes crazy, so that you can sort of seamlessly watch one to the other, which I think people did a lot this week, which is kind of interesting.
By the way, if you watch the end credits very closely, I guess the last little piece of animation is of the Underminer's escape vehicle racing across the bottom of the screen. So maybe if there's an Incredibles 3, we'll circle back on this. But as for example, erasing Tony's memory, so you now have Violet once again struggling in high school and trying to reconnect with a boy. I don't know. I mean, that sort of took away from that character. In fact, there was a wonderful grace to her. She'd earned this confidence. She'd earned, because of everything she'd gone through in the first movie, and to suddenly put her in a position again where it's like, oh, this boy doesn't remember me, and water squirts out my nose. And I know it's an animated film. I know it's intended for a family audience and big laugh out of the water gag and all that, but it just sort of kind of undermined a character that I had really enjoyed from the first film. And so much reliance on Jack for key laughs and that sort of, I mean, Jack to me is kind of like Paprika, a little goes a long way. And the raccoon fight was funny. And in fact, you and I both know that the tag gag for the Disney princess sequence in Ralph Breaks the Internet, and that's Miko going feral on Vanellope. And it just sort of like, do they ever sort of compare to us as like, well, we're doing a whole raccoon thing. Are you going to do a raccoon thing? Because maybe you could go someplace else with that tag gag for this thing.
Right. Well, that was another thing, too, that broke while we were off, was the Ralph 2 trailer, which teased the princesses, which is great.
Yeah, and people don't realize that actually goes on for another 2 and 3 minutes, and there's some amazing reveals about when the princesses all let their hair down and reveal their flaws. Just gotta go to movies, gotta see this thing.
Yeah, the outfits alone are gonna move so much merchandise. It's gonna be crazy.
Very true. But
yes,
I enjoyed it. We talked earlier about the strobe effect. You're right, that looked cool. I had never seen that before in animation. But was it a little on the nose for you that, okay, so now it's Helen out in the world having the adventures, and now it's Bob at home taking care of the kids, and just a little too much of the Mr. Mom stuff?
Yeah, I guess one of the things I was surprised about is how much sort of emotional depth that stuff with him at home had. At least for me, I thought it was like, okay, so he's strong. We can see him punch a giant robot and all this stuff, but the harder thing, the thing that really tests his strength, is keeping his family together, teaching Dash this new math, which I thought was a great joke, dealing with a moody teenage daughter, figuring out what to do with Jack. I mean, I thought it was just, it was nuanced enough, and the animation was just so brilliantly staged that I was afraid it was going to be too Mr. Mom, but I was happy that it was not.
That said, I will give it to you that wonderful scene in the living room with Bob and Violet where he basically apologizes to his daughter. I mean, that was wonderful work.
Yeah.
I'm happy to have an incredible sequel. I've been waiting 14 years. If they want to go back to the well, I'll go.
Yeah.
But that said, I have to group this with things like Cars 2 and Monsters University, where there's wonderful stuff in it, but it's more of a serviceable sequel. I always bow down to Drew Taylor's box office instincts. You were the one 5 minutes before Coco's opened. You identified that this is a masterpiece. This is going to do amazing. I looked at it and it's like, it's good.
It's good.
But, a masterpiece. And now it's the third highest grossing Pixar film of all time and an Oscar winner. And so you, I believe, are much more in tune to what's going on at the box office or how the public reacts. And obviously, again, you look at these opening weekend grosses where, I mean, that's 2.5 times the business that Incredibles 1 did back in November of 2004. That had an opening weekend of $70 million, and we're now looking at what, 181 million?
Well, I mean, if the fact that it cleared Dory's 135 a few years ago, so I think it's gonna definitely clear the $1 billion mark. But it is interesting coming so close after Coco. I think that the one criticism that is leveled at Incredibles 2 that I will kind of get behind is there's not a moment like in the first one where Mr. Incredible thought that his family was dead, and that amazing emotional sequence. There's nothing like that in this one. And Coco was nothing but just sort of raw emotionality, and I wonder if that will hurt it at all, or if people just won't care.
Given what just happened with Solo, I have to admit I was genuinely concerned about Incredibles 2, figuring that between Deadpool 2 and Avengers Infinity Wars that this would have sucked the gas out of the superhero tank, and it's like, and that's just not the case. I mean, people wanted to see this movie. People came out.
Yeah.
I guess I'm kind of a little concerned now about Ant-Man and the Wasp, July 6th.
Well, I'm seeing it this week, so maybe I can pop in on your Marvel show and just add my 2 cents early.
Love that. That's another one I really want to work, really want to succeed, because I so enjoyed the first one. You know. All right. Well, anyway, so to sort of double back to what I talked about at the top of the show for Dayton Disneyana, I was there with Bill Farmer, the voice of Goofy, who had some wonderful stories about working. He's been the voice of Goofy now. He was first hired over 30 years now. He's been voicing this character.
Wow.
And he was telling this story about after he came on board, they set up the character voice department, and he was so happy that he got Goofy. Now, mind you, he also does Goofy and Pluto, and he also always warns the people that when they're recording for a show, it's like, look, let's save Pluto for the end, because once I start barking, I'm not going to be able to record anything else. It kind of blows up my throat for the rest of the day and that sort of thing. But he was telling this great story about Tony Ensemble, who was the gentleman who, after Clarence Nash passed away, who took over voicing Donald Duck. And the thing is that Donald is all from the diaphragm, and poor Tony Anselmo gave himself a hernia twice doing Donald.
Oh my God.
And so evidently Wayne Allwyn took great delight in this, that, you know, when Tony would come back into the studio after having operations, and it literally would be clutching his stomach while doing the Donald voice. And, you know, Wayne was like, make him do that line again. You know, I want to see this face. But the other folks who were at this event were Mike and Patty Perazza, who probably not familiar to a lot of Disney fans, but trust me, you know these folks work. In fact, Patty has an absolutely fascinating story. She was the first female animator hired by Walt Disney Studios. In fact, she came out of the CalArts program. She was going to school on the East Coast, and the dean of her college out there was like, well, what do you want to do? It's like, well, I'd love to be an animator. And he actually hands her the brochure for CalArts and says, you know, they just started a program here, you should go there. But she looks at the prices, and it's like, oh, you know, there's no way I can afford that school. And the dean's like, well, what if I contact them and find out if there's financing? So, well, sure. And he calls the school and reached out to Patty and said, they've looked at your portfolio. They've just offered you a full scholarship to CalArts. And so she was told, she goes out to the school, and she eventually finds out that not only has she been given a full scholarship, but it's being paid for by the Disney family.
Wow.
But wait, it gets better. Okay, so it's the end of her freshman year, and they do a showcase for every year at CalArts. You need to do a film. And so, you know, they show her film in the showcase, and this tiny little woman comes up to her at the reception afterwards and said, you know, I so enjoyed your film. And Patty's talking with her, and well, what did you do? You said, well, you know, a long time ago, I worked at the studio, and I was in the ink and paint department. In fact, it really makes me happy that, you know, you're, you know, in the animation program, because a lot of us girls who worked in ink and paint wanted to be animators, and they wouldn't allow us to cross over. And so, oh, well, and Patty's like, I'm sorry, I didn't get the name. What was your name? Oh, I'm Lillian Deer.
Wow.
The guys go, what? It's like, this is Lillian Disney. And so at the end of the reception, she goes up to her teacher, who is Jack Hanna, the famous animator of all those great Donald Duck shorts. And, you know, she goes, Jack, is my scholarship being paid for by Lillian Disney? And Jack, he starts shaking his head yes, while his mouth says, I'm not allowed to tell you that. So he honored the agreement with the family. But yeah, she said she'd see Lillian all the time at these things, and it was just so thrilled that for Lillian this was personal, that finally she was helping women become animators. Which again, the irony of this past week at Annecy, we had Julianne Crummett from the Multicultural Audience Engagement, who was there talking. She was part of the Women in Animation World Summit, and in fact, Ralph Breaks the Internet presentation. They didn't have Rich Moore there presenting, but they did have co-head of animation Carrie Litamaki and the co-head of story Josie Trinidad. So if you want to put a message in the front window, the fact that John Lasseter is shown the door on Friday, and the following week you have these three women at Annecy representing Disney, I mean, that's a pretty clear message.
Yeah, but you promised us something, Jim. You promised we all want to know.
Okay, so here's the thing. Mike and Patty were part of the initial team working on Beauty and the Beast. Now remember, when Beauty and the Beast first started, it was not a musical. It was this really dark, gothic thing.
That was the Purnham version, right?
Yeah, the Purnham. Yep.
Yeah.
And they bring all of this test footage from the film. When Beauty and the Beast first came out, all anybody could talk about was, oh my God, the ballroom scene and the how they use CG in that. And she brings the initial tests where it's Andreas Deja. They have this scene where the camera actually moves into a room through the rose window and goes through Belle's bedroom, and you actually get to see the computer model of this cat that Andreas Deja was doing for the film. And so that was cool. But now she then tells this story about Beauty and the Beast at this point is in trouble. Everybody recognizes that this really dark, strange take on the story just is not working, especially since that year we had a Little Mermaid open. People are embracing, all these wonderful songs and the colors, and Disney finally has figured out how to make movies again. And here's Don Hahn and his group working on this dark, dark take on Beauty and the Beast. Is like, oh my God, we are miles down the wrong road. And so they stop production cold, but recognizing that the staff, you can't just have these people sit around. You got to give them something to do. So Disney now says, okay, tell you what, while we're rethinking the project, we're going to have a filmmaking contest that we're inviting everybody to do a 2-minute long short film, on their own, and the person who delivers the best film gets a $1,000 prize. And so Mike and Patty are a young couple starting out, and it's like, well, that $1,000 will go a long way in our lives. Let's see if we can do something. And Patty's the one who's, the whole time they've been working on Beauty and the Beast, it's like, you look at Mel Shaw's drawings and there are all these enchanted objects, and it's like, that's not the movie we're making. I mean, at this point, Belle has 2 sisters, just like Cinderella. She has kind of instead of an evil stepmom, she has her father's sister, an evil aunt, and it's just loaded with human characters, and they're trying to sort of shoehorn in some enchanted objects. And that's why, for example, if you've ever seen the concept art from this era, there's kind of a flying sedan chair. In fact, that's another computer test they brought. They show the flying sedan chair. But so Patty's like, look, we need enchanted objects. We need this thing to have energy and magic and life. And so she actually comes up with this kind of unique concept. And she and Mike make this short little film called Bubble Boogie. The conceit of it is that if you had a camera inside of your dishwasher as the dishwasher was running and the plates are dancing, and this is 88, 89 type CG. So,
right.
You have circles that still show the kind of rectangular wiring underform and that sort of thing. But they fire up this test and they're watching it. And Drew, you would have picked up on it immediately. As I'm seeing this stuff projected on the screen, here are plates bouncing just as they do in Be Our Guest. Not only that, it's the exact same color scheme, that very theatrical lighting coming in from the top, and the way the plates are pitched to the edge, and the energy. And at one point they have, just like the forks diving into the bowl doing the Esther Williams thing, they have a fork and a spoon doing the exact same thing. Eventually it cuts away from the CG and you see it's Mike sitting on the couch with a newspaper, and he reaches around next to him and it's like, honey, have you seen my Walkman? And she opens the dishwasher, and there inside the dishwasher, in addition to all the dishes, is the Walkman. That's what's been playing the music. Oh, by the way, and the music was Splish Splash.
That's great.
Yeah, everybody shows their films. Mike and Patty are the ones who take home the $1,000 prize. But more importantly, John Hahn sees this footage and goes, I'll take that, thank you.
Right.
And hand carries it to, evidently, Menken and Ashman and shows them. And it's like, that's how Be Our Guest became Be Our Guest. It was on the back of Splish Splash and this computer test.
Wow, that's amazing.
You only get to hear this sort of stuff when, ironically enough, you got to go to Ohio because, in fact, that's the other thing. I am really hoping that, Bill Farmer comes back and does Dayton Disneyana again, because his wife Jen was telling me about if you get a couple of drinks into Bill, we can get him to tell the truth about the Goofy movie and how terrible Jeffrey Katzenberg was to him during that movie.
Oh, wow.
Evidently that, this was during that period where Jeffrey was shoehorning celebrities into Disney animated features, Demi Moore into A Hunchback of Notre Dame, or, Mel Gibson into Pocahontas. And I guess at one point it's just sort of like, can we get a celebrity voice for Goofy? And it's like, no, you Goofy has to sound like Goofy, not
right.
Zach Galifianakis, so. All right. Anyway, so I guess for now we're finally caught up here, and so you've seen all but 10 minutes of Fallen Kingdom, right?
Yes. It'll be interesting to see what that does against Incredibles 2, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it had a great kind of vibe, and the last half of the movie is kind of a haunted house movie set in this old Victorian mansion, so it'll be interesting. But the next time we record, I'll have done the press day for Pixar Pier and ridden the Incredicoaster and all of that stuff. So I'm going to put your feet to the fire, and we're finally going to get the first part of your Pixar characters in the park next week.
That's our very next show. So, all right, tell you what, then it's a date. That's on, the 23rd?
Yeah, I'm going to be there on the 21st and the 22nd. It's opening on the 23rd, so I'll have the full rundown of everything you can experience. I was there last week, and if they can pull off building everything before this thing has to open, it's going to be something else, because there was still a lot of chicken wire and duct tape and stuff like that. So,
and that's pretty much the same story down in Florida with Toy Story Land. In fact, they actually had to push off all of the annual pass holder previews or special events, the exclusive access, to September.
Oh, wow.
They have cast members in there right now testing it over this weekend, just making sure they've got their load, unload, safety procedures in place, but they're nowhere near ready. In fact, they're running crews in there, paint crews, prop crews, that sort of thing. They're doing their damnedest to have that thing ready for its opening, which is exactly 1 week after Pixar Pier. It's June 30th.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, we will talk about all that on the next Fine Tuning. And
awesome.
For now, on behalf of Mr. Taylor here, I want to thank you folks for listening, and we'll be back much sooner.
Be sure to tune in again for another fine episode of Fine Tuning with Jim Hill and Drew Taylor.